Welcome, this is Jen, the Liberty Lion, and today we're looking at taxes. So we're looking at a Supreme Court case, ussupremecourt.gov, and the website is here. I will post it, supremecourtus.gov/oral_argument/argument_transcript 00-1831 PDF. You can Google it and find this court case. We come down here to page 6, line 9, Mr. Jones. Of course, if you file a return, then you're not exposing yourself to any criminal obligations. Obligations are what you find in a contract. When you agree to the contract, you have rights and obligations, and there are usually some stipulations. You do this and I do that, and you can't do this and you can't do that, and if you do this wrong and if you do that wrong, so on and so forth. And if you don't file a return, it would be, I'm not familiar with a statute that makes that a crime by itself. So if you file a return, then you're not exposing yourself to any criminal obligations. And if you don't file a return, it would be, I'm not familiar with a statute that makes that a crime by itself. That's because it's a contract. And if you don't sign the contract, you are then not obligated. Only once you sign the contract through your signature and which is your voluntary positive act, the same way if you contracted with the government to dedicate so many years of service in the military, you sign a contract. You have to lay down your positive voluntary act, which is your signature. Same with any contract, you have to sign it. If you don't sign it, there's nothing they can do because there's no obligation on your part to do the thing in the contract. The W-4 is a contract. The only way you become obligated is through your signature when you sign the W-4. Now it may be that it's a crime in connection with some intent to conceal. Okay, that's after you sign the contract. But just the fact that you didn't file, even though, see, he's trying to say things in a way where it's not readily perceivable to the average person that they're talking about a contract. Even though I come before the court on tax cases, I'm not an expert on criminal tax matters because those are contracts. So he's saying he's not an attorney who specializes in contracts or tax contracts. But it's my impression that that would not by itself be a crime if you don't file a return. Really what he should be saying, if you don't file the W-4 requiring you to file a return, it's not a contract. But if you don't file a return, how are they going to know whether or not you are stating things as a fact? Because on the 1040, for example, you have to put down the information and then you have to sign it and you have to swear under penalty of perjury that the information in there is true to the best of your knowledge. So once you sign it, it's a contract. It becomes law. It becomes law because you sign it. Now, I'm going to go over some things, and I just went over one of them, which was in Upsher's book, and it's also in the dictionary, Black's Law, where it talks about, Black's Law talks about how a federal government means people within the federal government and not the state's individual citizens. Okay, so there is no power over individual citizens by the federal government. And this is Upsher's book. I showed this a little while ago, where I talked about taxes, and Congress were allowed to issue bills of credit, but they could not make them legal tender, nor punish the counterfeiter of them. Okay, so I talked about that earlier, and I talked about how also he says that the federal government has no authority over individual citizens. In the Black's Law Dictionary, the definition says that it does not have authority over the individual citizens of the states, because the individual citizens didn't contract with the federal government. The states did. The states cannot obligate their individual citizens to become federal taxpayers, because even though the United States and Congress assembled can make laws for the United States, the entire country is not the United States, for one, and two, there are still rules that they have to follow. There are chains of authorities. They can't just have arbitrary authority. They have to follow rules, and those rules are not always written down somewhere. For the most part, they're just the right and wrong of things. So the federal government has no authority over individual citizens. But if they offer you a contract and you sign that contract, you've done a voluntary positive act, just like any individual could when they join the military or sign a contract to buy a vehicle or sign a contract to purchase a home or land or any other thing that they're going through, a bank or another private individual who's loaning them money and they're agreeing to do things. The licenses are private contracts. Your driver's license is a contract with an entity, and your work license, if you have any, are contracts to follow certain rules and laws when you do a type of work. So when you get these licenses or you sign these forms, you're signing contracts which obligate you as an individual. So if one person doesn't pay taxes, they don't go after the entire community. They go directly after that person and his or her property. So that's kind of what this is saying here. He's saying, the attorney speaking, I think, is Mr. Jones. He's trying to be very vague in what he's saying, but he's saying that if you don't sign the contracts, there are no obligations. So in other words, if you don't file a return or you don't file the W-4, you don't have a contract, and so there's no obligations upon you to provide anything to the federal government, and the federal government can't charge you with any criminal act because you don't have any obligation with the federal government to pay for anything. And this case was concerning an attorney who didn't pay taxes for, I think it was 10 years. I'll show you the top of this in a moment. And I think when it says question, I think that is the judge. Now I found this paper here, and it says Rehnquist, so it may have been Judge Rehnquist, Chief Justice William Rehnquist. Failure to continue to file. Of course, if you file a return, that you're not exposing yourself to any criminal obligation, and if you don't file a return, it would be. I'm not familiar with the statute that makes that a crime by itself. I'm not an expert on criminal tax matters. Okay, criminal tax matters, like I said, is the crime of signing a contract and then not meeting your obligations, the obligations of that contract, such as to file a form. So let's say that Mr. So-and-so, whoever's the case about, whoever's being charged in this matter has no obligations because he doesn't have a contract with the IRS, and so they can't charge him with a crime, and there's no statute for it because he never filed the forms. Of course, the tax court will use some other way to go after him. I don't know if they found him guilty or not in this case, but this is United States is the petitioner, not the United States, because the United States is a government and the Supreme Court of the United States. So this is Interesting that they have it this way in the United States here. Petitioner v. Sandra L. Kraft. So I think that this was her husband, who was an attorney, and he didn't file taxes, so he took his portion of the estate that they had and sold it to her for $1. And so then they came after her for the taxes, but I'm not quite sure on the whole thing. So you'll have to go through and read this for yourself. It is on Google, and I just Googled this here, and I'll put the link, and then you can look this up for yourself. Okay, this says Federal Reserve notes not taxable income, because income is something of the future, and the future can't be taxed. I think that's why they started saying wages, maybe, or they classified the income as debt instruments. Now it's of the past because it's debt, and they tax the Federal Reserve debt notes. They play a lot of games. It's unconscionable, it's fraud, it's deceit. All those things void a contract, including, in some things that I've read, they include misunderstanding as a reason to void a contract. Some say no, that a misunderstanding is not a reason to void a contract, because then anybody could claim that they misunderstood a contract and therefore cause a contract to be voidable in a court. There may be some other reasons why you can void a contract, but for purposes of taxes, to me, it's fraud, deceit, and the fact that they are unconscionable contracts. And so they're void, not particularly voidable, meaning that you don't have to go to court. And again, on the income being a word that indicates something in the future, it was in one of the congressional records, some sort of debate possibly, that the future can't be taxed. You can't tax the future. You have to wait until something happens and then tax what has happened. And so what has happened is debt, and so they tax the debt. They base the note on the debt, and then they tax the debt. And Gregory Mannarino on his channel talks about all the time how they're Federal Reserve debt notes, and that they are waging a war on the middle class, because the middle class is the largest group of people with a certain amount of income between 70 and 250,000. Which is what Napolitano had mentioned today in reference to the 84 or 85,000 new agents that they're hiring with the requirement to be able to carry a gun and use it. Okay, so just another short video on taxes, and look for this court case and read it for yourself, see what it says, see what you think about it. And then try to pick out the words that are related to contracts and see if you can read between the lines and understand that what the attorney is trying not to say is that all of these forms amount to nothing more or less than a contract to which people have volunteered to be a part of. Okay, like, share, subscribe, leave a comment, and I'll talk to you later.